First of all, I'm Caitlin Brandt. I'm the digital iNaturalist technician at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. So welcome to our iNaturalist Canada webinar series, where we're bringing in guest speakers to discuss all things iNat. Today, we are joined by Mike, who's going to discuss how he has used iNaturalist in the classroom. This webinar will be recorded and available on CWF's website. The easiest way to find this is to Google CWF webinars. Here you will find recordings of past webinars as well as announcements for upcoming ones. So a little bit about how to ask questions. We have a Q&A feature that should be at the bottom of your screen. It has a little speech bubble. Ask any questions in there as we go through the presentation, and I'll help facilitate these at the end of Mike's presentation. He's happy to answer your questions. Finally, the Canadian Wildlife Federation is one of Canada's largest conservation organizations, undertaking projects in conservation across the country. Our mission is to conserve and inspire the conservation of Canada's wildlife and habitats. And we do this in a number of ways. One is through engaging the public and youth in citizen science, like iNaturalist Canada, education programs like Wild Outside and the Canadian Conservation Corps, which I am an alumni of and highly recommend. There's also specific projects in freshwater, marine, and terrestrial environments, many of which target species at risk, like the right whale, Blanding's turtle, at-risk bats, and the monarch butterfly. And that's all from me. So Mike, if you'd like to go ahead.
Well, I am honored to be asked to be part of this wonderful series. iNaturalist for me has been an absolute joy to be part of. And I've been a science educator for many, many years. So I put together a small PowerPoint for us and a few videos that I have created to show you. So who am I? Well, as you could see from my little images here, we're all very complex individuals, aren't we? So I come from many different background elements, and iNaturalist to me is just something that brings it all together. I worked for many years at the Canadian Museum of Nature as a science educator. I've worked with many groups. I presently work at St-Laurent Academy School, and I teach all the way from preschool all the way up to grade 8. Sometimes I've even done high school. I am the main principal science teacher for the entire school. We go actually up to grade 12 now. Over the years, we've been looking at various sites near the school. We've been exploring these sites and celebrating their biodiversity. Over time, some of our projects have become well known. We ended up working with the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we helped to create a youth accord that was presented in Japan. So I've done a lot of work on the international level as well. I brought students all over the world. I brought kids to England, to Norway, to Sweden, to Florida, to Costa Rica, to Peru, to Galapagos, and other places. So I really enjoy traveling with the young people, because it blows their mind when they see just how beautiful our planet is and how much diversity there is in it. But I want to focus very, very much on a local area, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on right now. Now, I live in Ottawa, so you can see from my iNaturalist map here, most of my records go from around Algonquin Park towards Montreal. That's where I grew up, in Hawkesbury, actually, on the way to Montreal. And then, of course, down towards Kingston. That's kind of my little triangle of observations. But even with that, I really do focus in the Ottawa area and particularly at the Macoun Marsh. Now, the Macoun Marsh originally didn't have a name. It had no name at all. It was just a little pond in a cemetery, which ended up being the National Cemetery of Canada, known as the Beechwood Cemetery. And this tiny little marsh was in the southeast corner of the cemetery. And I went over to the directors one day and I said, do you realize just how amazing the diversity is in this tiny little wetland? And they said that the wetland really wasn't useful for their needs, obviously, because it's a wetland and they can't do very much with it. So the opportunity to have schools engaged in biodiversity research and having school children using that space really interest them. So we started a fundraiser and they met us with in-kind donations. So when it was all said and done, including the in-kind donations, we raised over $100,000 to transform the area into an outdoor classroom. And what did that include? It included everything from controlling some of the runoff to make sure that the water stayed as clean as possible. Also, we built a structure, which was an outdoor observatory. But the observatory is open concept, so they're like giant windows that look out into the wetland. It included trees that were brought in and native plants. So we transformed this space, and we had a lot of help. We joined forces with the Catholic School Board here in Ottawa, and eventually even members from the public school board also joined with us and engaged young people. And we used, actually we created programs where some of my students would go out and give tours to other schools. And that was like their final project of the year. And this was really exciting for a lot of the kids. So this was before I knew about iNaturalist. So the Macoun Marsh project, this is pretty much what you'd see if you looked it up on iNaturalist. You can see I definitely have the lion's share of observations, but a lot of those people in the past 3 years, of those 67, a lot of them are my students. And we have actually recorded over 1,500 species in that tiny little space in the corner of the cemetery. And it's literally like a 15-minute drive to Parliament Hill. So all these living things, plants, animals, microbes, all these things are living right in the center of Ottawa. And this is one of the most amazing and career changing opportunities for me, because when I realized what we could do and what kind of an outdoor classroom we could create with this space, it changed the way I was teaching. So this is the way. I'm going to show you a book actually that I have put aside here. Now I put together, I have 10 years of books like this, and each book showed different elements of my students going out at the marsh. We would write down everything that we were doing, March of a certain date and what species we would see. And we would photograph them, and we created 10 years of this. So imagine my excitement when I discovered iNaturalist, that I could put in all of this information into online, that everyone could actually access this information. So that was huge for me. That was absolutely huge. So my students started to go on and started to use, I asked them not to use their real names, since some of them are they're 11, 12 years old, a lot of them, especially grade 6. I focused a lot on grade 6 level because biodiversity is a big part of their curriculum here in Ontario. So what I've done is I got them to choose their name, and they would use a school email to set up an account. We had a few challenges in the early days because they were borrowing my photos, and the system of iNaturalist would flag these images as someone stealing my images. And then but the kids said, well, I saw the animal too, but I didn't have a camera, so I used Mr. Leveille's camera. So anyway, so then I started making a pool of images for the kids who didn't have cameras. And then they started using some of these images. And I would give out images to the kids that they could use. So we would take multiple images if they didn't have a camera. Usually about 3/4 of my kids have some kind of a camera, whether it be on their cell phone or something like this that they can bring out. Some of them get cameras as a Christmas present because they know they're going to use it as a part of their science work that they do. But for me, it's so important that iNaturalist is a portal to the wider world. And one of the things, before I go any further, I want to show you this book. And I'm sure some of you have seen this author before. It's The Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. And I've heard this man speak. He is really an interesting speaker. He talks about the sense of place and that kids need that sense of place. He talks about fears of a lot of kids suffer from all kinds of phobias nowadays. I had one child afraid of butterflies. And that's what happens when, they don't go outside. That sense of awe and wonder, the idea of, replacing the 2-dimensional with the 3-dimensional, using our senses. And of course, we have more than 5 senses, but these senses are really heightened when you're in nature. So another thing too is I think you gain a lot of respect for something if you know how to name it. And that's another thing I love about iNaturalist is that you can actually post something, and the system will help you try to name those objects or those species. So I'll continue on. This is just an example of the title page that I set up for the Macoun Marsh project. It's literally 3 minutes from the school. If we're walking with the slowest kids, it might take 20 minutes, and that's the slowest kids. Usually my administration gives me a double period with these guys, and that's what we do. So here is the iNaturalist map showing the little corner of the cemetery. It's a really small space. It's like the wetland that's in the middle of that triangle is only like 80 meters by another 100 meters by another 80 meters. So the wetland is very small. It's fed by springs, and we have a very healthy amphibian population in there. From we've had redback salamanders, we've had blue spotted salamanders, we have bullfrogs, green frogs, the Gray's tree frog is in there. And the fact that we're having so many amphibians in there is a very good sign. And as well, I like the color coding as well with iNaturalist because you can learn a little bit about taxonomy by doing it, by color coding. You'll notice that there are a few, of course, other spots outside the triangle, but the majority of what we started with was within that triangle. So I'd like to show you a very brief video. And this video will just give you kind of an overview of the Macoun Marsh.
Okay.
Thank you. Did you hear the sound that went with that? I'm just checking if the sound came on with that. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so let me go back and share my screen. Go. There we go. 1 second. Should be coming up. There we go. Okay. All right. Next. Oh. All right. So here's an example of something that you cannot experience unless you're out with your students. It just shows you how, you know, what missed opportunities you may have if you're not outside with your kids. Here is one particular day. It was fall. I went out with my group of grade 3s, and all of a sudden, the sky turned dark. It was like the ages of the passenger pigeons with all these birds coming through in migration. There were Bohemian waxwings. And there's this one section at the corner of the marsh area or study area. And literally, and I actually enlarged one of these images to count how many birds there were. There were about 1,000 birds that landed on these fruit trees while the grade 3s were standing under the trees. And it was a biological storm. There's no other way of describing it. Now, you would think that the kids may have been afraid of this incredible scene, something out of Alfred Hitchcock or something, but they weren't. They were in awe. You can see this one little boy who has his mouth wide open, amazed. You could feel the wings as they were flying around circles around the children. They had no fear of the children at all. And they were gorging themselves on these berries. It just shows you how important it is to be out there, because you never know when something, a National Geographic moment is going to hit while you're outside. I mean, it was just one of the most phenomenal moments of my entire career. And I'm so glad I got it on film, because, you know, no one would believe me if I tried to explain to them what we just saw. It was like incredible. All right, so next. So using iNaturalist for taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is a tricky subject on a good day. There's so much to understand with taxonomy, how you identify a species, whether it be a plant, an animal, a fungus, a protist, whatever it is. So there's many ways that I introduce this to the children. Now, for myself, one year, just for fun, and this is what these images represent, I challenged myself as a teacher, and I got my students involved in my challenge. I tried to see if I could photograph 1,000 species in 1 year. And just down to the wire, I got number 1,000 on the 31st of December. But anyway, my students were following the number with me as I was trying to reach that number. But I wanted to encourage them to try something like this too and see how many things they can see in their backyard. So here is something I created for my classroom. Using little Schleich and safari animals or Mojo, or like the little animals that you can buy in stores, I created a tree of life where the kids looked at form and shape, and they tried to post the creatures accordingly. And it was really a lot of fun. This is about 8 feet long. I got a big canvas and I put pictures of the toys. Some of them are little silk plants, and for the fungi and protists, a lot of them, since there's no toys for some of them, I just made little cards and laminated them. So it would take at least an hour for the kids to try to place these onto the big board. But it was a great way to introduce them to the different kingdoms of life. So here again, another example of some of the many different species that I've posted up on iNaturalist. But again, the kids are learning photography and they're learning patience at the same time as they're being out in nature. One of the things that I think is very, very important is that a lot of kids don't really know what can be found around us. In Canada, we're pretty fortunate to have quite a bit of biodiversity. And in most cases, we have very low numbers of dangerous species. Of course, you do get, you know, a few creatures and plants that you need to watch out for, or maybe some ticks or something like that to watch out for. But generally, we have a very short list of nasties compared to some other countries. So I think it's very important for kids to realize just how safe most of our environments are. And as you can see here from our little marsh, these are some of the many photographs that we've taken with our microscope. So we take water samples and we bring them back to the classroom, and we do a lot of this in winter. So I have an auger, and the kids drill through the ice in the middle of winter in January. We take water samples from the sediment and we bring it back, and a lot of these things were found fall and winter. The beautiful stentors, which are very large protists with multiple nuclei and these beautiful little cilia that move. They're just phenomenal. And of course, the euglena with its little red eye swimming around, that seems to be half plant, half animal. The kids love that one. There's so much you can do with these things. One thing I wanted to show you, and actually I have it right here in front of me, not only do we look at living things, although iNaturalist doesn't really promote this part of it, but we've found fossils too. So here's a trilobite that was actually found by some of my students at the Macoun Marsh in some of the black shale. This is not in situ shale. This is actually shale that was dumped by the cemetery at some point from downtown Ottawa. But the shale is 500 million years old. And the kids also learn a little bit about evolution and how life has changed over time. So I'm going to, just so that you're aware, I want to give extra time at the end to answer as many questions as I can. But we're going to continue on into the next section here. So iNaturalist for ecology. Ecology is one of my favorite parts of the iNaturalist element, because you can set up projects by location. For example, I was one of the first on board, I guess, in Ontario. So I started posting projects for Algonquin and Bon Cher Provincial Park, and a few other parks, and then it was later taken over by Parks Canada. But also when I took a group to Costa Rica in 2017, we started a project from that. Fletcher Wildlife Garden, which is right near the Arboretum in Ottawa, incredible amount of species inside of an urban area. Also been part of BioBlitzes. BioBlitzes is another great way to engage my students with iNaturalist, see how many species we can find in a 24-hour period or over a weekend, depending how much time we have to work with. But it's just another way to teach ecology. Of course, species are so different between locations. Now, here is one of my drawings. I do a lot of art, and it goes very well with nature studies. But I created this map right around the school area. The school is down towards the bottom of the map. You can see St-Laurent Academy at the bottom there. And all those little dots are showing the distribution of species. And I made this map based on the iNaturalist records that we have. But one of the things we were trying to figure out is the corridors of how animals are getting into the marsh area. We've been finding unusual creatures showing up, and we're wondering how they're getting there. For example, about 4 years ago, we had a full-size snapping turtle show up at our marsh, which we had never seen before. And again, I've been watching this space for almost 20 years. So how does a full-sized, humongous snapping turtle make their way into a tiny little marsh in the middle of a heavily urban center? So we figured out that it was probably coming through Macoun Lake, as you can see at the top of the map, and then several hundred meters to the north is the Ottawa River. So they would come in by the Ottawa River probably, make their way through Macoun Lake, and then cross Beechwood Avenue, and then make it into the cemetery. And we figured out this is the most likely path because we know we've seen snappers up at Macoun Lake. So again, we're trying to figure out how animals are moving around at night in our city. So I have another little movie for you. This one is one of my virtual field trips. This one is to Mer Bleu Bog, one of the most spectacular southern bogs in Canada. And it gives you a very good sense of what it would be like to go to Northern Ontario. So I'll let you take a look at that.
Hi, we're on another field trip, this one in mid-August, and we're at Mer Bleu, and that's south of Ottawa. So come with me and we'll see what we find. You can see all the cattails. This is an area that is rich in what we call peat, lots of organic matter. This is the kind of landscape you would get if you were in Northern Ontario. This boardwalk takes visitors out into the heart of the bog itself. This is where you can really see the northern plants. The acidic bog conditions are similar to environments further north. The high water allows wetland plants to keep growing and for peat to accumulate over the past several thousand years. This tree is called a larch, and it loses its needles in the winter, also known as tamarack. Here we have a blue jay. Hello, Mr. Blue Jay. How are you doing there? As you can see, the ground here looks solid. If you put your foot down on it, it's super, super soft. Really weird. Oh, wow, look at it's a snapping turtle. It's just under the water. Can you see it? Oh, the plants are moving. It's right under the water. Here it comes. Da-da, 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 da-da. Whoa, look at that nose. It's such an awesome animal. The snapping turtle. Here's a green frog. You can see the ridge behind the eye that goes all the way down the back. These guys are very well camouflaged here. Let's look at some of the species I've seen over the past few years. The low-lying mat of vegetation growing on top of the bog has some very interesting plant species, including Labrador tea, wild calla, swamp laurel, cotton grasses, they're nice and fluffy, and many other plants. 9 species of orchids, and carnivorous plants such as the roundleaf sundew and the common bladderwort. They're all found here. Some of the mammals I've seen include snowshoe hares, cottontails, chipmunks, raccoons, meadow voles, and some really tiny, very, very fast little mice. Not quite sure what these guys are. Some of the birds I've seen, everything from sandhill cranes to mourning doves and the common yellowthroat. Reptiles include the midland painted turtle, the super rare spotted turtle, and garter snakes. I've seen green frogs and boreal chorus frogs. Insects include the dogbane leaf beetle and the northern cloudy wing. I've seen so many people rush through this boardwalk and not even see a thing. You really need patience, and the more you look, the more you find.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, now let's play. Let's see here. Second, sorry. I keep making this little mistake here. All right, let's go on. And let's press play. Here we go. Oops. All right, I'd like to mention a little bit about climate and climate change, how it affects living things. One of the things we've been monitoring through our Little Marsh project, and I know folks at our Ottawa Field Naturalist Club has been watching this as well, is the emergence of the eastern-tailed blue. They have been moving into our region over the past few decades, and they're coming more and more common. The same thing can be said for the Virginia opossum. We didn't have any Virginia opossums around here until fairly recently, in the past decade. There have been sightings. And if you click on some of the northern sightings, you'll notice very recent dates. And as you go down towards into the United States, you see, like, you can go back in time, you can see them, they're actually moving north. So I find that very interesting to talk to the students about climate and how it relates to, again, how it relates to species. Living things and climate are really not separate. They're really connected in many, many different ways. And that's one of the reasons why some species are becoming more endangered. Like, for example, the gray jay in Algonquin Park, they're moving north. And a lot of the ones that are in the south, their young are not surviving because, as I've read, that their food stores are rotting and they don't have food for their babies, but they need colder temperatures farther north to preserve their food. One of the things too I'd like to talk to you about, and this is a little bit off of iNaturalist, this is something else that you can do that goes well in conjunction with iNaturalist, is the globe program. So you take your cell phone, and what you would do is you can actually, you would photograph the north, the west, and say the south, and you would put this onto the globe program, and it's linked with NASA, and it connects with some of their satellites that are traveling over us. And these climate satellites, they require the data, ground data, and they can compare, and they will send you the satellite information that goes with your images. So it's quite an interesting opportunity to not only record species that are in your backyard, but help to record the weather and the climate. So this is another great opportunity, but you have to take a short little course to be accepted into the program, and then you can be part of it. And it's an awesome opportunity. I would really recommend being part of that as well. And methods of recording. Nature is very diverse. And if you look into the history of how we've recorded sightings over the years, just like I did with my original nature journal, I like to encourage my students to create their own journals. And their journals, it doesn't matter if they get all the species right, okay? What matters is how they would describe the species. How do you describe the difference between, say, one bird and another? You can look at color, you can look at bill, you can look at bars on the wings, you can look at the color of the legs of the bird. The plants are the same, you can look at leaf shape, you can look at color. So get them involved in comparing. And here is one of my older nature journals that I used to do for myself privately, but it's so much fun to be part of this community of naturalists. It doesn't matter if you can draw or paint. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself a good artist or not. It's all in the experience, being there, being present, being part of something. One of the things that I did with the community of schools over the past few years, and we had to stop, of course, because of COVID, but we did a 3-part program on weekends for several years. We did it. Again, with the Catholic School Board, the Public School Board, and I'm in the private system. So we got together on the first of 3 sessions. The first session was learning taxonomy and learning how to identify and how to be present in a space. Number 2, the second part was all about learning about biodiversity as a general theme. So learning about conservation, learning about ecology, learning about what's going on in our world and species that are endangered, and how much biodiversity is part of our lives. And that included what we would do is we would make a big 5-kingdom picnic. And we would bring food, everyone would bring food as a potluck. And the teachers that were involved, we all made and brought food representing the 5 kingdoms of life. And then on the last of the 3 sessions, we had a session with local specialists, farmers, politicians. We would bring them in, and the kids got to speak to them and ask them questions about what they're doing to protect our environment. So it was a 3-part series, and it went very well for several years. I would like to eventually get it started again. It was something that we had a lot of schools and a lot of kids that took part. All right, next. Now this is my last little video before I do questions. And this is an idea that a group of us here in Ottawa are considering. We'd like to promote the idea of creating a bio reserve in Ottawa. So we'll look at that.
There is only one Earth, not one planet for nature and another for humans. However, it seems that our planet is being treated as a distant backdrop in most people's lives. Yet everything we use and eat has either been mined or grown. In search of the raw materials to create these objects and support our daily lives, humans have left a footprint over the entire planet. All urban areas are intrinsically dependent on the surrounding nature to provide them with necessary resources and to assimilate the wastes that are generated. Urbanized areas cover about 20,000 square kilometers of Canada, only 0.2% of the total land. Canada is, nevertheless, a highly urbanized country because 81% of its population, about 22 million people, lives in cities and towns. Nature is often considered something that exists far away from cities. In reality, the division between nature and a city is blurry. There is nature all around our cities, even inside our own homes. With similar needs to humans, wildlife face similar challenges. And like us, they can find everything they need to survive in the city. Many creatures make amazing physical or behavioral adaptations to survive. Cities will face many challenges over the coming decades, from adapting to a changing climate to rapid human population growth. A related challenge threatens global biodiversity, resulting in many species facing extinction. Many modern city planners believe people, plants, and animals can live in harmony through nature-friendly urban design. UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program is connecting people to nature. Biosphere reserves have three interconnected functions: protecting bio and cultural diversity, fostering economic and human development, and serving as a site for environmental education, training, and research. There are currently 714 biosphere reserves in 129 countries. The cities of Ottawa and Gatineau would be excellent candidates for UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program. Ottawa and Gatineau residents are passionate about their green spaces. Mud Lake, Lac Leamy Park, Macoun Marsh, Petrie Island, Fletcher Wildlife Garden, Gatineau Park, and Mer Bleu, to name a few. Plans to allow movement through green corridors will continue with a focus on quality and sustainability. The Ottawa Carleton District School Board operates two outdoor education centers: McSkimming Outdoor Education Centre in Ottawa's East End and the Bill Mason Centre in the West. 22,000 elementary and secondary students attend the centers annually. St-Laurent Academy School has been promoting its partnership with the Beechwood Cemetery with the Macoun Marsh Biodiversity Project for almost 20 years. School children continue to use this outdoor space in the center of Ottawa as a center for outdoor education. Over 1,500 species of life have been identified at Macoun Marsh. The Ottawa Field Naturalist Club, founded in 1863, is the oldest natural history club in Canada. Over 800 members participate in the many aspects of the natural world. Many of their members provide a wide array of educational opportunities, from birding to botanizing, investigation to publication, conservation to cooperation.
So I'll take questions now.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation, Mike. It was wonderful. We do have a few questions, so we can get started. One of our first questions was, when did your field trip visits begin to the marsh? Are they still ongoing?
They are ongoing. I'm very happy to say this September, for the senior classes, I'll be running regular field trips in person. But for the youngest ones in the school, I'll still be talking to them through their smart boards. So I'll be running virtual trips with them. But the older students, I'll be able to bring in.
Great, thank you. We also have a question from someone who was curious about how the iNat stolen photos thing happened, and how you set it up so that students could use your pool of photos without any issues.
Well, what happened again originally is that they were using some of my images for their observations because they didn't have a camera. So the system would flag that, of course, as somebody's using my image. So I made a collection or a pool of images that they can use, but I would, hand pick image for you. Otherwise, you may get two kids using the same image again, and you'd have another problem with flagging. But also what I've offered for them to do is draw what they saw, and they can do a little drawing of it, and they can post that as well. And of course, you don't have to put an image. It's just that you can get a kind of like a stamp, a research stamp when you get an image confirmed by someone else. But it's just nice to be able to have a picture if you don't have a camera.
Yes, of course, those verifiable observations versus just casual observations. And really the point is learning here for kids. So I don't see any problems with doing casual observations where you don't have that photo, as you said. Yeah, so we have a few more questions. We have, do you have a specific type of microscope that takes pictures that you would recommend for use in your classroom? Someone asking who doesn't have one yet for their school.
The best kind of microscopes, like I've used many different kinds over the years. I like the projection scopes because you can project that on a screen, and then you can, with your camera, just take pictures right on the wall. And you can project the microbes huge up on a big screen. But also, of course, you have the wonderful microscopes that connect to your computer. And you can take snapshots, of course, very, very quality snapshots with one. Actually, I'm going to grab one in my classroom here, and I'll show you one. I think it's called Dyno Light is what they call this one. Yeah, here we are. It's nice to be in my classroom. I can show it. So this is called Dyno Lighting. It sets up directly to your computer, and it's a very powerful little microscope. It doesn't work with slides, though. It only works with insects or something like that. But for a slide microscope, there are many different ways to do that as well. You can also, of course, get microscopes that will also directly connect up that you can use with slides. I don't have one myself. I've been photographing right from the aperture with my Canon camera, and I just click, and I've been getting fairly good pictures from that. And I have a line of kids with their little cameras clicking and their phones clicking into the microscope. But it's fun. It's fun.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we had a couple questions that I can probably help answer too. Is, does iNaturalist ID microorganisms? And yes, you can do that on iNaturalist for sure. And do you have any experience with that, Mike?
Yes, and actually over time, I'm starting to get pretty good at some of the really lesser known groups of life. One of my favorites is the tardigrades. You cannot believe how common water bears are. And they literally look like a little bear. Like, I'm just going to make a little doodle here and show you what they look like. They have this plump little body. They have a little eye spot, and then they have 8 legs. But you can only really see 4 legs at a time. And they have a little snout like that. And that's a water bear. And they're about 1 millimeter long. And there's all kinds of them. And I discovered one day, I found one that it was just the skin. The animal was gone, but it was filled with eggs. They use their skins to protect their eggs when they lay their eggs. So you find the eggs, it's so bizarre. And these things live on trees, on the lichen on trees. You know, if you find a little piece of bark that fell off a tree, don't rip it off a tree, of course, but if you find bark that's fallen off and you pick up this bark, hydrate it for about an hour or two, and then use an old toothbrush and go and brush it onto a glass slide, you'll see the little water bears wiggling around, and it's hilarious. They're awesome.
Wow, you are a great artist, by the way. You just doodled that really quick. Super good. Oh, that's really interesting. I've never seen a water bear under a microscope, but that's a really cool project.
And they're very common.
Yeah, we have a question asking about, is there any specific science projects that you do with your grade 6 students other than general observation and recording?
Oh my goodness. Like everything from drilling through the ice in winter to I've done a special set of labs that talk about anatomy, because I feel that if they're going to understand the animals that we're looking at, I want to do an anatomy lesson to go with it, so they actually understand. So I go to the fish market and we pick up a few invertebrates and things, and we look at them and we study them. And of course, I mean, I don't like to use the formaldehyde stuff because that really turns them off. So by getting something fresh from the fish market usually works better. Then it just smells like a red lobster in here. That's awesome.
Oh, that's fantastic. We do have a couple more questions. It's getting pretty close to 4 o'clock, but I'm happy to answer these last 5 questions as long as you are.
Yeah.
So if you're welcome to stay, everyone, as we complete this. So do you have any online resources such as lesson plans from your program for others interested in connecting classes with nature?
Well, one thing that I can offer, well, first off, and I know that you'll be sharing this, but you guys can contact me. I don't know if you can see that there. Leveille at St-LaurentAcademy.com is how you reach me. But if you look up my name on YouTube, Michael Leveille, you will see a whole bunch of my virtual trips there and videos on other subjects too. So you're more than welcome to use these in your classroom if you'd like. I'm happy to share it with you. I've got topics on a lot about biodiversity because that's really close to my heart, and how to conserve these species. So.
Oh, that's great. What kind of equipment would you suggest to start an iNat project for your classroom?
I would say that one of the really important things to get is a good net. And to show the kids how to use the net. Like you don't just swing back and forth or you won't have a net very long. You go under a branch, like say this is a tree branch, you go under and you shake the branch like that with the net open, and then you see what you've got. And I found tree frogs that way. You often don't see tree frogs sitting in there. But yeah, they'll hide on a leaf, little insects, and you get the beautiful candy stripe leaf hoppers, or you'll get those buffalo tree hoppers, and all these really bizarre, strange little creatures that normally you never see. And they're always hiding in the vegetation. They look like thorns, they look like sticks, they look like leaves. You don't see them, but that is a great tool. And of course, there's all these little tiny mini microscopes that you can bring with you in the field. And one thing that is very interesting that if you want to try, this is something I tried very recently and I was blown away by it. A friend of mine has some tiny long range UV lights. And we went out at night to look at lichen. and it blew me away. It was like rainbow. It looked like opals from Coober Pedy, Australia. Every color, showing up on a rock. Trees were covered in all these incredible colors. Flowers look incredible under long wave ultraviolet. I say long wave because the short wave can be bad for the eyes. You got to be careful with long or short wave. But the long wave, nature looks so different with UV light. That's another cool little trick to try out.
Wow, that's really interesting. I love UV light, using it to identify species and see things you've never thought you could see. It's amazing. Yeah, just a couple more questions. Have you ever had students record scent when they're outside in your classes? Unlike sounds and pictures where you've captured, have you ever talked about scent with them?
Well, I have talked about the 5 senses. One of the things that we had a few years ago is we had a young woman come to the marsh who had like visual impairment, like she wasn't able to really experience the visual side of the experience. So I found myself really focusing on the other senses with her. And I found it fascinating. Like you pick up a mullein leaf and you feel the beautiful softness, like a warm blanket, And again, you have wild raspberries, wild blackberries, and all these different things that can be added into it. And of course, you've got the mint that gives a beautiful smell. I try to encourage with the journaling that the kids make the journals according to their curiosity. And like one day, for example, one amazing day, we found a raccoon skeleton. And over the period, we stopped everything we were doing. And over a period of almost 5 weeks, we collected very carefully the bones. Most of them, there was almost no flesh on the bones, no muscle on the bones. The bones were just scattered. And we actually cleaned the bones and we built the skeleton. Actually, I can show you the skeleton that my students put together. This is grade 6. So let me show you. This is the skeleton that the kids did. Let me see if I can squeeze in. It's behind a desk right now. Here we are. So that's the skeleton. And it was found by my grade 6s. It was cleaned. And the amazing thing was that we found almost all the bones. And the kids just loved it. One boy said to me, "Mr. Leveille, this is better than television." Anyway, that was fun. We actually ended up spray painting the skeleton at the end because well, the bones were discolored and they looked all kind of weird. So we spray painted it. It looks pretty now.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't believe you found everything. It looks really, really good. And it's amazing that kids were able to put that together. Really, really cool.
Oh, it took almost like 4 or 5 weeks to put that together.
No, I believe that. I think it would take me longer than that. We have a question about Seek, and perhaps I can help with this too. Have you ever used the Seek app with your students?
The Seek app? I have not. I have not used the Seek app. I'm curious.
So the Seek app is a children's version of iNaturalist. They're both made by the same people. And it is really, really good for younger kids. You don't need a login or anything like that, but it has the same identification software. So if you take a picture of a plant outside, it will still help you identify it. And this is really good for younger kids. And as they get older, they can link their Seek account to an iNaturalist account and keep all those observations. So just a little background on that for the person who asked. And we have one final question. So this person was saying, use a lot of technology when you're outdoors. Do you find it very helpful, or can it be a hindrance and distraction And do you have a set of iPads or other devices for students to use when they're outside, or maybe they have a journal too that they can draw pictures in and come back to you?
All of the above, actually. Over the years, technology has made well, definitely we use more technology now than we used to, but I encourage the kids to bring their drawings, their pads with them, to take notes. I encourage them to even to do poetry if they want. Do poetry, do a sketch. It doesn't have to be super realistic, but you know, what inspires you out there? We need the next generation of naturalists, and this is the only way we're going to get them. And we have an important job to do. We have to encourage them.
For sure, I completely agree. So important. And I wanted to thank you again, Mike, for this awesome presentation. I'm feeling a lot more inspired now. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming as well. And great discussion at the end. So many good questions. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Have a great night, great afternoon from wherever you are in Canada.